In this tutorial we'll look at various ways of generating rock shapes. So this first example will be very basic, but it will explain the theory behind making rocks pretty well. So let's start with Perl noise. Set this to 5, and then need auto levels. And then we need a tile sampler. And we will set this to be a paraboloid shape. Scale it up 5.5. Let's do a 6 and 8. And then we'll take this and we'll hook it up to scale. And we will use this scale map multiplier and set it to 0.85, and then we'll move down here and set this offset to 1, or yeah, let's set it to 1.1, and the offset of 0.5, just so they overlap each other. And we'll change the color input to use scale. Actually, we'll use color, and we'll hook up the color here, like this. Okay, so this is our primary rock shape. We can hook this up to this node down here, so we'll see what it looks like. And now we can actually, yeah, let's add a little frame here. We'll add a comment, just so we remember what we did. Primary shape, I can pull that on top. So this comment will always stick with this node. So if you have a node selected and right click and say add a comment, it will always stick with it. So let's do our secondary shape, and we'll use the same values, but we'll just add more of these. Do 10 by 10, and here we can type secondary, and these two will combine. So let's select this node and type blend. And we'll hook this one in here, and we'll set this one to min darken and set it to 0.4, but we'll also invert this one first. So select this line and type invert, and you see now we start to get something that looks a little more like a rock and looks like a balloon, because this min darken blend mode is just blending the darkest pixels, and therefore you get this carving effect. But we don't want to go too far this way, where it just obliterates the whole shape, since we have so many dark pixels now in here. So we'll set it to something around 0.4. Let's clone this. We'll do another step, and we'll call these detail shape, and this we will, let's crank this up to, so you see we step in increments here. We have our large primary shapes, secondary shapes, you know, almost half size but randomly dispersed, and then our detail shapes are the next level of scale. And let's add another blend node. Select this node and type blend. Connect this one here, And we'll set this one to subtract, but we don't want to go this far. Obviously this looks pretty cool and rocky, but it's not what we're doing right now, so we're setting this to something low like this. And you see what it's starting to do is just start introducing a little more fractals on here. I think we can set this one to something really low. Let's select this. Let's crank up the AO so it's easier for us to see. Also, I should hook up auto levels here, because you see here we start with kind of like a normalized range, but after combining it, we're flattening the range more and more. We can see by, you can see the histogram by using the levels node. You see we're using these grayscales here, and as we're combining, we're losing more and more, whereas the auto levels is flattening, so it uses the whole range. So if you're doing a lot of combining and with blend modes, make sure to once in a while stick in auto levels to get the full range of grayscales back. Yeah, this looks pretty good. It still looks a little bit balloony or cartoony, but if you're making a cartoony type or stylized type texture, that's fine. But to make this look a little more natural, we can add a directional warp in here. And the directional warp node is, it's going to push the pixels based on this intensity input. It's going to push them in this direction and with this intensity here. So let's just hook this one up to the intensity input, and you see, since it's horizontal here, start pushing it this way, but we can actually try to push it a little more down just to break up these shapes, just to show you guys. It's another way of introducing more random shapes, a little more fractals, but without adding more of these chiseled cuts. It's starting to look pretty good for this first example. If we darken this, we can see a little more. Specular response can be easier to see the shapes that way. So we're not going to go into any actual detail, and we're just looking at these initial shapes, and we're keeping the shapes really clean. We don't want to over warp. Let's say if I would, you know, start adding tons of noise in here, like black and white spots. It's really important when you make rocks to not obliterate shapes. You know, as soon as I start putting something like this in, it's easy to just, we now like ruined all our shape reads here. So with all my rock creations, I try to keep that at a minimum, and you just create shapes like this first and try to dial them in based on the reference and what we're going for. So now we're using the same directional warp node here, but we're pushing the shape based on itself, which means you shift weight around. So where we have a lot of bright pixels like this area, and we use this directional warp node, we're actually pushing this part up or down based on the direction in here. So it's kind of like geological aging, where you can make the rock kind of droop or be pushed around, but it's a natural way of adding some age and a good way of warping your stuff without introducing the noise that I talked about. In this example, we're going to look at creating rocks from a Voronoi source. So just a clean template file here. We start with the tile sampler, and we'll set 6 and 3 Let's take this X size down to, I'm gonna make it really thin ones here. We can do a little size random. Let's do some position offset. And I always do this 0.5. I want to angle these a little bit, so we'll go down here to rotation. Set it, maybe not that extreme. Yeah, something like that. And we can do a little bit of rotation random. And we will do color random. And then we will hook these guys up. Let's see if we can offset these. There's a bunch of these touching up here. So make them first a tiny bit wider, and then we'll try to just offset them more. We don't want too much touching here. That looks pretty good. Then we'll run this through a distance node. If you hold Control, you can move these inputs, so we want to hook it up here as well, and then we'll do histogram scan up to max, and we'll set this one to 5,000. Let's see, maybe we'll do less random positioning. Yeah, something like that. And then we'll do a little bit of mask random as well. Remove a few. Okay, that looks like a decent start. We can always go back and change this later, but this will be our start for our Voronoi pattern here. Edge detect. Crank down this guy here. Actually, I need to do a little bit of a touch up here. Yeah, that looks all right. And in between here, we'll put a directional warp. So imagine these are just huge blocks of a cliff. And we'll use one of my favorite nodes to distort shapes, which is this crystal node. We'll set this to 5. So instead of having this perfectly straight mathematical looking nodes, we'll introduce a little bit of distortion here to them, make them look a little jaggedy. We can just leave them like this. Just leave them straight. And this we'll set to just 1, so we have these thin lines. And this we're going to run into a flood fill node. So the flood fill is grabbing all these individual items that are divided up by this black line. So you see it creates like blocks out of these. And then we're going to set up a little bit array of different shapes here. So go into flood fill. If you type flood up here, you'll get all the shapes. So we'll get a couple of gradients here. And these are all hooked up to the flood fill. We'll do one with heavy variation. We'll do one with, yeah, just like this, straight, or maybe like just, these have a direction that's slanted, so we want to follow sort of the same angle. And then we'll do one that's kind of like more of a top down, do a little bit of angle variation on this. And then we want to do another flood fill, which is the random grayscale. And this one we want Wait, no, we'll want to do actually this guy. Flood filter B box size, which is the bounding box size, so the smallest shapes will be the darkest, and this is always good to hook up to auto levels. Okay, so far we've built a lot of nodes, but we have nothing visible on screen, but that will change pretty soon. Just want to try to get rid of this tiny little thing here. Let's see. Yeah, something like that. And we hook these up to gradient maps. I do this so I don't have to, a lot of people layer, 24 of these or, 10 of these. I like to just add as few as possible. So if you hook this one up to the gradient map tool, you can actually go in here and redefine what this one should be. So you can tighten up these grayscales. Let's actually start layering some of these and hooking that up so we can get a little bit of a visual first. So we'll combine them with the min darken. So you see what this kind of approach can give you. It gives you like, I really like this approach because it gives me a way to design my shapes how I want them, so it's easier to follow a reference this way in terms of like how large shapes are going and what direction they're going. Actually, I can show you like a rock I made that's using this very same technique, but obviously more layers. But so actually this rock I made recently, and I'm using this very same technique because I can really define the directionality and how the cells are going and how they're cut. Let's just continue blending these guys together. We want to clone this one as well. And same with this one. And here it's just a matter of dialing in. Obviously, I don't work from a specific piece of reference right now. So let's just eyeball this in a bit. Let's take this one down so we're not getting distracted. Let's dial this one in. And this one should follow our angle. Let's take this top one, do something like this. Let's do less, like 15 or something. And then this, we can move this one back. Like I said, this one to black. It's starting to look like something, and this. Let's do a little bit of variation here. And we'll drag in these colors more. cutting off the little edge of that thing. I'll pull this one in more. You can really design like how you're cutting the rock in here, which I really like. And here we can do a little bit more, yeah, 0.25. Do the same angle. Yeah, something like this. And then at the end here, we blend on our bounding box sizes. So here, now the biggest shapes are pushed out. Let's exaggerate our AO a little bit more so we can see. In this stage, we can also mix in like a bunch of, let's say for this one, since we have really soft and nice gradients here, we can blend in the Perlin noise to something low, and set this as an overlay. And you can see the difference. Instead of getting these really sharp cuts, we now get, you know, rounded, more organic cuts. So we can blend this overlay in potentially here as well. But now it's kind of doing the same thing, so we can do like a transform here. You can just grab this and move it off a bit, or even do a rotate. Don't ever scale this, because this actually breaks tiling, this transformation node. Okay, it's starting to look pretty interesting here. So we have this. You can see this method creates a whole lot of tearing. You see the tessellation here is not liking this shape. So what I'll do here is I'll do a histogram range. We just flatten the range a bit. We can crank it up ever so slightly again. And what I typically do here is I'll add another one of these edge detect nodes. Set this to 2. Add an extra gap, and we'll add a bevel node here. We'll set this one down just to it closest that gap. And then we'll multiply this on top. But also we have, aside from, you see the beveling that I added there on the edge, we have this gap that we want to close as well. So we're going to do another distance node here. We're going to hook up this into source, and then we're going to use this edge detect in here. And you see now that gap is closed. We can set this to something even though to get like a little more of a fade there. Looks a little bit better. I'm going to do something else here in the end to fix the rest of that tearing. Yeah, to that reference we looked at before from my ArtStation page, like essentially what you would do is like essentially you can go in and redesign the direction of these this noise to do more of that axis, and then, you know, scale up how long they are essentially to get bigger shapes. yeah, super powerful way. Just to get back into this, slightly mathematical look again. We don't want to overwarp our shapes, but we want to do add another crystal node in here and maybe set this one to something like 6, just to start introducing that. Let's see, 15 maybe. Start breaking these lines up. You see like some of these unnatural looking lines. Let's just add a bit of detail here. So we'll add let's add a safe transform node. I just want to add like a little bit of a small cut shapes that goes through these main shapes. So you can add one of these safe transform nodes. Just have it offset or do something different from your main texture. And then we're going to do a slope blur. Set this to min, crank up the samples, and then we will select this node and find the blur node. If we compare, you see this here, and if I select this, we're kind of like nudging the nodes, but we haven't combined it back in yet. So if we move this one back, we can here add a blend node. And set this one to min, darken. We can tile this one. And we'll do just a little bit less. So we add smaller hints of damage, but without warping our whole shape, essentially. This one is too much here. Let's set this one back to 1. We'll go down a little bit lower. Yeah, this is what we're looking for a bit more. Kind of just these. See this little cut here. These types of details. And to take care of the tearing, which is still fairly evident on this, I have this low passing node that I've created that should be included where you found this tutorial. Essentially it's just blurring in steps. You can see here we're getting rid of, so we can crank up the steps and the amounts. And now our tearing is pretty much gone. This node is also good at introducing a little bit of soft detailing. So if I fade this one out, you see this is the old version here, and with the low passing applied, it creates this kind of like softer subshapes around here. Let's have a look at another example. We'll use a tile sampler to start with again. This we will attempt to create like a layered cliff, much like, let me see, something like this one here, where we have some big shapes, but it's cut up with these, whatever we call these striation lines. So we will start with polygon here. do a 5 side. Like this one up here. Select pattern input. We'll do a 4 and a 3. Actually, we can hook this one up here right away. Adjust the size, so we'll want them to be a little bit wider like this. And crank up the scale. We will continue down here by setting this one to, let's say 0.1. Do the offset 0.5. This shape select and hit BL like this for blend. Do a gradient with min darken. And you see right away we have some kind of weird shaping going on, but we want these to go off an angle like a 0.3, so create some layering. And then we'll just do a little bit of color random on this. Let's see here, 0.5. We'll do auto levels here again. And this is our start shape. Let's just crank up a little more AO. Yeah, so this is our base shape. We will now go in and like carve lines out of this. So we use, let's see, not tile sampler, we can use this tile random. And if we set the X to 1, we'll remove this split. And we'll remove this interslice, which is the gap in between. We set that to 0. And then we just add the color random. And we'll see, we'll add maybe one more band. Let's try 6. Crank up the random Y so we get a little more difference between them. Let's also do, let's start with this actually. So we can select this line and we'll do a directional warp. And we'll use this one. You see right away we're starting to create these bands, but they're obviously super mathematical. But it's a good start. We can also go in here and before we do this directional warp, we actually warp these lines based on this shape. And set this to 15. Maybe it's a little bit more. You see we're starting to break up these lines so they're not perfectly straight. We can do that. We can push them down. That looks pretty good. So let's, before we do this, since these shapes are so straight, we want to add another directional warp in there and use our little friend from before, the crystal. And we'll go with 5 is usually a good start. Just giving it a little more of a natural feel. Maybe we'll do 6. That looks pretty good, but it's a little too much. Okay, that looks pretty good. You see here in the normal map, like these edges that we're now introducing when we're tearing this shape apart, they become kind of zero edges, which looks really weird. So we need to emphasize these a little bit better. So we can use a edge detect here, and we can try with 2 to begin with. Let's try 3 maybe. We put a bevel here, and we zoom in a bit, and we'll try to dial in so they just meet like so. And on this guy we'll remove this roundness as well. We don't want to, we want sharp features here. I think it's really important for me to, at least the start shapes are really sharp and crisp. So we want that here as well. So let's blend this one on here, select the line, type BL, and then blend this one on top. You can try multiply first. It's a bit too intense here. That looks a lot better. Also, the bevel node has a little bit of an issue with these kind of jaggedy edges, so we can go in and smooth them a little bit. We can also try min darken. Min darken, that's the one we want, yeah. And that's not doing anything, so we actually have to put a levels node in here. So we can dial that in. I think if we use this, we can actually try to scale this one up more. So just this bevel. Start 1.5 maybe. Yeah, that starts to introduce like a little bit of a carved edge. A little bit better on here. And another thing to do here is we can start blending this guy back in. Multiplying this on top so the bands have some vertical spacing, but actually then we can go in here and say not color random but based on Y size, which then means we get this, the smallest band gets pushed in the most. We can go back in here also to, if we set this back to 0, like there's no offset. But it's kind of nice to have that kind of a little bit of an offset. We can break up these edges a little bit more and make them a little more natural. So let's move this off to the side. We can fit a couple more nodes in here. Let's add a slope blur. And then add a save transform, and we'll do it on this guy here. We'll tile it twice, and we'll hook that up into here. Crank up the samples, set it to min. See, it's craggling out that edge, but we can also put a blur on here so we can just soften the effect. I can tone this down a bit. It's pretty interesting. I'm gonna tone this effect down a little bit. Another thing I like to do is something I call shadow carving. So we'll use the shadow node. We can either use it on itself, so let's set this one to 2 for instance. Crank up the samples, and then we blend this back on top of itself. And we do a min darken. Or a multiply. And we can play around with a light angle. So what this one is doing here, let's actually set this one back a bit. It creates a little bit of interesting volume, since if I remove this completely here, this thin layer here is like just completely flat and perfect, but if we add this shadow here, excuse me, it creates this a little bit of a lip down on this shape, which is kind of cool. Well, we can try set this to min and then just do levels on this to actually carve a bit better. And let's see if we find a better light angle. It's a really interesting way of adding some extra shapes to this. This is looking a little bit bonkers right here. Let's keep it here. And also we could use just this mask itself. Or is it way too strong? Take out that node for now. Let's do multiply actually. Seems like it's picking up that guy there and that guy on the top. I think we'll actually flip this around. See here, we get a little more of the ledges here, so we get little more of the effect overall, the whole thing. And I think for this, to add another layer of detail on top of this, we'll add some cracking, and we can start with the splatter circular. And do discs. Crank up the radius and radius random. We can do a bit more of these. Scale them down. You can play with the shape. Ideally, I never want them to touch. That's what I'm trying to dial in there. Distance. Something really high. And then we can just mess around with, see if we can get a more interesting shape. Yeah, that looks alright. Maybe a bit more patterns. We'll do the same thing here. I think we'll directional warp. We can see if we just reuse this crystals node from before. And we'll do edge detect on this, remove the roundness, crank up this, add a bevel again. Just get them to touch, perfect. And then we can do the same thing again. We just take this one and run a directional warp again. And now we will use this pattern. See some cracking happening over there. Can use this guy again. Use the shadow carving. Blend this one on top of this. We can see what it looks like with min darken. Oh yeah, it's just doing a little bit up there, so let's go with some multiply. So for all these layers we're adding, we just want them to add something to the composition. And same thing is going on here, where we need to address these edges, so we can try using our bevel up here too. To fix that. I'll set this one to 1.5 maybe. pretty good. We can do the same thing for this. We can, I guess, reuse this. I guess we should use our most recent shape here. We should also blur this. Yeah, that's a pretty good start for something like this. And this one doesn't have to push in the same direction. It could push, you know, a little bit up or down this time when the other one is pushing vertically. So we get these, or horizontally. So the bands are pushing the rock this way, but this cracking is pushing it up or down instead. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Let's look at another example, a little more traditional with a tile generator. This is a node that's doing a lot of similar things to the tile sampler, but it's good to have an understanding of what the alternatives are. So yeah, let's just put 6 and 3 in here. Let's just first create a shape, so we'll start with a gradient. We'll blend this to polygon. And for this we'll set the sides to 4, and we'll try to scale this one like bigger than allowed. Let's flip the order like so. And we'll use this one in here. So let's see, we switch from brick to image input. We can actually hook this one up over here. Let's just lay these out. And then we'll go down to scale and scale this up. And we need to change the blend mode. So right now it's adding everything together, but there's so many of these and they're layered on top of each other, so you can't see. So we switch this to max. And let's see here, luminance random, offset that. Here, now it's starting to look like something. Let's do 0.5 and 1 there. We want to rotate these guys so they go off of 45. It's always good when you're creating a rock texture to not have it go straight up and down. A diagonal texture like this will kind of offset the tiling. It wouldn't look as obvious when it's repeating, when it's straight and gridded. So this is always a good idea. And we'll put some position random in here. You see, you might notice the similarities with the tile sampler, but this one is just a little more lightweight. We can do a random scale here, maybe 0.25. Looks like a pretty good base. Let's hook up our crystal. To get a little bit of this ever important natural look. And let's do splatter circular. And we will up the radius on these and do maximum radius random. Like make them a little skinnier. Same thing here, we're essentially just creating a Voronoi pattern again. We need a distance. Histogram scan. Let's up the amount a bit. And we will do that so we get them all straight, and then we can rotate them. We want these to go counter this direction. We can actually make them a bit taller. Okay, that looks good. You copy this node, so we apply the same type of distortion, but we can go in a different direction with this. I can up the intensity a bit more as well. Add another directional warp here, and we'll use this pattern. Breaking up that. We're on edge detect on this. And here we can run a bevel, or you could also just run the distance node. They're essentially doing the same thing, but this one doesn't have any of the options that the bevel node has for softening. But if you just want to sort of close the gap, you could use this one just fine. You can actually add one more layer here of distortion, so we can distort this shape based on this. So let's do that here. It's always good when you have different elements that are going together when they're distorted by each other. It just looks more natural, and when shapes that go over each other are coming together like that. So now where this pattern is going over these ridges, it kind of gets a kink on it. We'll add a slope blur. We can add a Perlin noise for this, just to break up these kind of perfect lines. We can play with the scale on this. Let's run the auto levels here first, and then pipe it into. We'll do a min darken. That looks pretty cool. And we can go in here and put a level here if we want to make these less prominent. Cracking. And we can actually tone down this one. And this is a really good start as well for a natural rock formation. There's more stuff we could do here. You know, you can add another layer of these cracking patterns on a finer scale, and we could also swap out this whole start. Let me show you one that I've built from before. Just paste that one here. Here I'm using the tile random to stagger some shapes. I'm not going to build this one live here, but I can scroll through so you guys can see what the settings are if you want to recreate this. Tile random is a really interesting node where it lays out patterns on a grid, so you can you get minimal overlap. Obviously here in this example I've cranked up the scale a whole lot, but essentially the default usage of the node is the patterns don't overlap, so you can create really interesting layered effects like this. We can swap this one out, and maybe we can just reduce the amount. Still works for this. Yeah, so this is another way you can create some natural rock formations. So for this example, we'll be looking at a sheet cliff with thin layers. So let's just get into it over here. And we'll start with the shape node, and we will pick a disk, make it a little bit smaller. Then we will use, let's see here, one of my custom nodes that should be included in this download. Otherwise it's free on my Gumroad. We'll put a crystal down here. This is essentially just a directional warp node, but it can push in multiple directions at once. Let's set this one to 4. And just want to break up this profile a bit. So this section here, usually directional warp is just one direction, but if you select direction vectors 2 here, it's going to push from 2 directions at once, and then you have 3 and 4. Let's use 2 for this. What we want to stay out of is getting weird, like little small tendrils or stuff that kind of loop back on itself, so watch out for that. And we can set this one back. We don't need full resolution on these, so we set these back to 512, so this output is 512. So we copy this. Let's make 3 of these. So for this we'll just try a different angle, just so we get a different shape from the other one. Yeah, exactly this kind of stuff is what we don't want. That looks different from this. So we have this, and then a third one. Try some complete other direction here. And we can try with 3 vectors maybe. So we have this, this, and this. And what we can do here is, if we make a generator out of this later, we might want to stop these shapes from turning into something weird, like we were talking about, like that. You know, if this noise will change, that might happen. So we can actually lock this random seed to always being 0, which means for us in this graph, regardless of how the user changes the graph in the end, like these will always remain the same base shapes. Okay, so let's hook a bevel up to these. And we want to bevel inwards. Let's do something like that. And 3 of these. And then we will do blend. Note that you can't select this one and hit blend. It will, well, actually it works now. It didn't used to work because this one has 2 connections. That's good. We need a gradient. And we'll do min darken. No, actually we'll do multiply on this. No min darken, but we'll flip this one 180, because we're going to create a sheet rock where these will layer on top of each other, so we want it to be dark on the top and bright at the bottom. And we'll copy this, and we will hook this one up like so. So we have 3 different shapes, and we can frame this. We can go to start shape. Just move it off a bit more. And then we'll do one tile sampler. So in the tile sampler, we start by selecting pattern input to hook all these up. So we want 3, and now we have 1, 2, 3 here. So we start by putting this guy in here, this in here, and this like so. And we'll set this to like something 8 and 3. We want to crank up the scale. So let's do 4. We'll crank up the overall scale as well. That's starting to look like something. We'll do a little bit scale random as well. See here, we're starting to get something. Let's leave it at 0.4. We're gonna have a little bit of a position random here, like a 1. A little too much. Yeah, it's like even layering. Do offset 0.5. Want a little bit of rotation on these. Just as we talked about it in the previous example, just have them go straight across. It's better to just have them go on a slight angle out for tiling. Super minimal random tiling, maybe like, because if we do this too much, it's gonna go into crazy town right away, and we still want our layers That looks pretty good. And then a little bit of color random on this, maybe like 0.25 or something. Yeah, that's starting to look pretty good. But this is our primary shape. We're gonna also add a secondary shape here. And here we will, every time you duplicate something like that, make sure you double click, because I don't know how many times I copied something and pasted and then I'm actually tweaking the one I don't want to tweak. So if you double click, you make sure you're staying on that when you're, yeah, we double up a little bit here. Let's do, we just want to create on these layered sheets, we want to create a little bit of cracking on the top of the edges here, so we don't want any color random on this guy. Like so, these were just be used as cut shapes. And we'll put a directional warp down here. Let's select this guy, type dir, and we're gonna warp it based on this. And just so these layers do something similar to these. So they're warped based on that shape. This obviously looks all weird on here, but once we combine them, it'll look pretty good. So we will do this guy in here and this guy like so. And then we'll do a min darken. Actually, we can just look at what this shape looks like. Looks okay. Let's crank up the AO again. Actually, we'll put in our auto levels here. And now with this, we get this, but you see we're carving way too deep here. So we'll set this one back to maybe 0.2. And now you see we're just affecting the tips of these. So there's no layering happening like back here, only at the edges. Let's tone back this scale a bit. Yeah, it looks better. Let's do a little more layering here, so we'll add a safe transform. And then we'll just offset this a bit. Oops, offset. And then a little bit in Y as well. Yeah, let's do clean numbers. And do height blend. And we'll want our new thingy in the bottom and this in the top. See, we're creating way more layers here, but it's too strong. So crank this one up to max. And this one 0.6. So we get a little more layering going on, but more of these thin layers. We can actually use this guy here to dial in exactly where they show up. I think, yeah, that's good. Let's see. Looks like these guys maybe are stretching a little bit too much. We can tone these guys back. And maybe tone down this a bit. can see maybe we want to tone down this scale as well. Yeah, it looks pretty good. I'll crank up this AO again. So now they're extremely straight. There's no like, there's no wobbling going in and out. So let's blend some noise on here. We can use a Perlin noise. Set the scale to maybe 4 or something. Getting some of this action on top of what we already have. Again, we're just trying to make it look a bit more natural. And after this, we'll do a pseudo-directional warp. Let's add our crystal. Set it to 6. Technically we have this one here, but I think this one is scale 4, so we want to use a new one. Let's see. So we can really see the crystal shapes in here, so I think I want to blur this one a bit. Whoops. Select. Blur, maybe like a 5. Maybe a little bit less. Still want to get our sharp reeds. This you dial in based on taste, essentially. That looks pretty good. Let's add a little bit of noise on this. So we'll add another directional warp. And put a clouds 2 is usually pretty good for this. And we want to push it down. And you see we're getting a little bit of that rock. Like the rock detail on there. I like what it's doing with this edges, but I don't like really what it's doing with these flat areas. So what we could do then is like we'll blend this. We can multiply this on top. So essentially where it's dark, it won't do any directional warping. So it means we get more on these edges and less on the flat tops. Because we still want this really sharp cliff. We can do like a histogram scan on this. Just to sort of like isolate the tips. Yeah, something like that. It's a good start for a sheetrock. And that's the final example in this tutorial. Hope you enjoyed going through these examples with me, and see you on the next one.